Hi, my name's Alex Stephenson, and I'm the designer of Travelers of Storia. I grew up during what I call the golden age of RPGs. I'm talking Final Fantasy II and III, Chrono Trigger, Secret of Mana. These games defined the genre and were absolutely inspirational. During the height of these games' popularity, I started playing Magic the Gathering. I consider Magic to be one of the greatest games ever crafted. Over the last few years, I noticed there was a real lack of collectible card games that took the deck building and ever-expanding card pool elements of Magic and combined it with the best elements of the RPGs from my childhood. So I created one. Travelers of Storia is a 1 to 4 player, fully cooperative campaign RPG collectible card game. I've created a playthrough video for the first mission to give you an idea of what the gameplay is like. So let's get started. Like many RPGs, you're going to start the game by choosing a class. Whatever class you choose has its own unique combat deck you'll be using for the duration of the game. You have a choice between the Champions, which are melee fighters with strong efficient attack, the Guardians, which combine elements of clerics, priests, and paladins, Adventurers, which combine elements of rogues and rangers, and Rune Mages, which are your spell-wielding sorcerers. I'm going to choose the Adventurers for this playthrough. Each class's combat deck consists of 15 cards. Think of these cards as both your life total and your army. Let's take a look at the map setup information for the first mission. We'll need 16 random terrain cards, 3 campaign event cards, and 1 Nexus card. These are all shuffled together and laid out next to the encounter mat. The map is now set up, and in order to complete the mission, all I have to do is successfully explore all of the campaign event cards on the map. I can start exploring on any bordering map card. I've started on this corner card and reveal a Colossal Peaks. Looking at the world map card index in the logbook shows that a random event occurs based on a dice roll. I've rolled a 10, which means the high ground event occurs. I'm going to face a world enemy random encounter, plus 1 additional enemy, and enemy units can't attack during the first combat turn. When I win the encounter, I get a treasure card for my victory spoils. I'm playing 1 player, so every encounter I start my first turn with the top 4 cards of my combat deck in awaiting deployment slots, and 2 enemies in every random encounter. This encounter has 1 additional enemy, so I'll be facing a total of 3 enemies. Each combat turn, I first take up to 4 actions. Each allied unit in the game has an action cost that lets me deploy it to attack and defend me from enemies. I'm going to keep a running tally of how many actions I've taken. I take 2 actions to deploy the Treasure Hunter in front of the Feral Yar, and 2 more to deploy the Alluring Diplomat in front of the Huge Vermis. I've taken all my actions for the turn, so now I decide attacks. Both of my units have 1 attack, and this Brush Viper has 2 energy, so I'll have both my units attack the Viper. Now I roll for energy abilities, which are abilities all units in the game have. I rolled a 6, which means this Brush Viper uses Venomous Strike. It evades all attacks and would have fatigued any unit deployed directly below it. My units unsuccessfully attacked, and ordinarily it would be the enemy unit's turn to attack, but enemy units don't attack during their first combat turn because we're on high ground, so it's time to move to the next combat turn. Now I get to take up to another 4 actions. I can and do take 1 action to take the top card of my combat deck and put it in an empty awaiting deployment slot. Then I take another action and do it again. Then I take 1 more action to deploy this Archaeologist in front of the Brush Viper. For my last action, I'm going to use this Archer's action ability. Action abilities can be used for their action cost once per encounter. This one lets me deal 1 damage to any enemy, and since it has this Adept symbol, I can use it while the unit is in awaiting deployment. Time to decide attacks again. So I'll have my Treasure Hunter and Diplomat attack this Huge Vermis, and the Archaeologist will try and finish off the Brush Viper. I again roll for energy abilities and roll a 7. Both the Vermis and Yar use their energy abilities, and both evade and gain 1 attack for the turn. My Archaeologist successfully finishes off the Viper, and now the enemy units attack. Enemies attack the units directly below them. The Vermis deals 2 to my Diplomat, and the Yar deals 3 to my Treasure Hunter, fatiguing it. Fatigued units are sent to my discard pile next to my combat deck. Enemies are done attacking, and my Archer has a passive ability that lets me deal 1 damage to an enemy at the end of each turn from awaiting deployment. I'll deal it to the Yar. Time to take another 4 actions, and I'm going to deploy my deck's gold-rated unit, Rhea Goldex, in front of the Yar. She has 3 attack and 3 energy. Now the Archaeologist and Diplomat will attack the Vermis, and Rhea will attack the Yar. Once again I roll for energy abilities, and this time get an 11. I use Rhea Goldex's Fortune Hunter ability to get a treasure card, and get a Smelling Salts. Treasure cards also have action abilities that I can use for its action cost. The remaining enemy units have been fatigued by my attackers, and the encounter is now over. I shuffle the fatigued enemy units back into their combat deck. Return all my deployed units and units awaiting deployment to the bottom of my combat deck in any order. And finally, get my victory spoils for the encounter, another treasure from the treasure deck. The colossal peaks have successfully been explored, and now it's time to continue exploring. I can move to any map card adjacent to the one I'm currently at. Next I'm going to move to the Nexus map card. I can see in the campaign logbook that I get to reveal the top 4 cards of the Traveler deck and choose one of them to permanently add to my deck for the duration of the game. After taking a look at the Travelers to choose from, I decide to take Tristan, Master Tactician, and put him on the bottom of my combat deck. The remaining Travelers are shuffled back into the Traveler deck, and it's time to continue exploring. Now we're headed to the first campaign event of this mission, where we'll be fighting campaign enemies. If we look at our campaign logbook, we see we'll be fighting a random encounter, so 2 enemies total. So on my first turn, I put the top 4 cards of my combat deck in empty awaiting deployment slots, and take 4 actions again. I take 1 action and deploy a novice in front of the slave, take another for a novice and put it in front of the brawler, and use a third to put an archaeologist in another empty slot. For my last action, I use my archer's quick shot ability and deal 1 damage to the brawler. I choose to have my archaeologist and novice attack the brawler, and my other novice to attack the slave. I roll for energy abilities and hit a 7. So the treacherous brawler uses its rallied strength energy ability, giving it +1 attack and making it evade this combat turn. My novice deals 1 damage to the slave, then the enemy's attack. Both of my novices are fatigued from the attackers. My archer's passive ability deals 1 damage to the slave at the end of the combat turn, fatiguing it. Then it's time for the next combat turn. I take 1 action to draw from the combat deck, deploy the drawn armored scout for 2 actions, then use its veteran status ability, which gives it a permanent additional energy and gives it a better chance to use its energy abilities. Both of my units will attack the brawler, and now I'll roll for energy abilities. I've rolled an 11, so the brawler is fatigued. The remaining units on the mat are put on the bottom of my combat deck, and I'll continue exploring. Next I'm headed to the second campaign event. We can see in the logbook that we're going to encounter a random encounter +1 additional enemy, for a total of 3 enemies. It's turn 1 again, so time to put the top 4 cards of my deck into empty awaiting deployment slots and take 4 actions. I'll take 2 actions to deploy the armored scout in front of the rock slinger, take another action to put the wandering novice in front of the treacherous brawler, and take my last action to deploy another novice in front of the other brawler. For my attacks, I'll have my scout attack one of the treacherous brawlers, one of my novices will also attack the brawler, and my other novice will attack the other brawler. My roll for energy abilities this turn is 8. Both my wandering novices can use one of their energy abilities this turn to either evade or stumble upon, which lets me look at a face-down terrain card. I'm going to use stumble upon for both. The first stumble upon reveals a desert card, which, when explored, makes me fatigue the top card of my combat deck. The other stumble upon reveals another colossal peaks. My units now attack, and the scout and novice fatigue the middle brawler. My other novice deals 1 damage to the other brawler. Then the enemies attack. The rock slinger deals 1 damage to my scout, and the remaining brawler fatigues my novice. Time to take another 4 actions. I'll take 1 to draw a card, take another to use my scout's veteran status action ability, then take my remaining 2 to deploy my alluring diplomat in front of the brawler. Now my scout will attack and attempt to finish off the brawler, and my novice and diplomat will try and fatigue the rock slinger. I roll an 11, which means no units use any energy abilities, but it also means I successfully fatigue the remaining 2 enemies. Instead of continuing to explore more terrain, I've decided to rest before the final campaign event. I'm allowed to rest once per mission, and it lets me shuffle all of my fatigued units back into my combat deck. Now I'm ready to move to the final campaign event and do the first boss battle. We can see in the logbook that we will have to fight a total of 4 enemies as well as the boss, Slaver Cog Foul Yell. Bosses have no attack, only energy and energy abilities. Bosses use their energy abilities before other enemy units and allied units. In order to attack the boss, I'll have to fatigue the 2 middle enemy units first. Like normal, I'll start my first turn by putting the top 4 cards in empty awaiting deployment slots. I'll take 2 actions to deploy a treasure hunter in front of a brawler, and 2 more actions to deploy an armored scout in front of the other brawler. Because of my archaeologist's passive ability, I can use my smoke bomb's action ability without taking any actions. So I'll use it and make it so my armored scout evades this combat turn. I'll choose to have both my deployed allied units attack the treacherous brawler in front of the treasure hunter. I roll a 5 for energy abilities, which means the boss uses its Crack of the Whip ability, which makes both my units have -1 attack this turn, and the Quarry Slave uses Puncturing Impact, which gives it +2 attack and makes it evade. Unblocked enemies deal their damage directly to my combat deck, so this is going to be a painful turn. If a card would be fatigued from my combat deck and none remain, I lose the encounter and have to restart it. The Brawler deals 2 to my Treasure Hunter. The Rock Slinger and Quarry Slave deal a total of 4 damage to my combat deck, fatiguing the top 4 cards, and then my Scout evades from the Smoke Bomb. I'm going to take 2 actions to deploy my Treasure Hunter in front of the Rock Slinger, 1 more to deploy my Archaeologist in front of the Quarry Slave, and take my final action to use my Scout's Veteran Status action ability. I'll have my Scout try and fatigue the first Brawler, and my Treasure Hunters and Archaeologist fatigue the other. My roll for energy abilities this turn is Snake Eyes. The boss uses its Brutal Assault ability, which fatigues a random deployed unit, and would have fatigued a unit awaiting deployment if I had any. I assign numbers to my units and roll a dice to decide which is randomly fatigued. The Rock Slinger uses its Pebble Slam ability, which also randomly deals 2 damage to a deployed allied unit. You can see I've assigned the numbers 1 and 2 to the Treasure Hunter, 3 and 4 to the Archaeologist, and 5 and 6 to the Scout. My remaining deployed units get to attack, and the Scout fatigues the first Brawler, and my Treasure Hunter deals 1 to the remaining Brawler. Then the Rock Slinger deals 1 damage to my Treasure Hunter, the Slave deals 1 damage to my combat deck, and the Brawler deals 2 to my Scout. I take an action to draw and another to draw again. Then I take my remaining 2 to deploy the Novice units into the 2 empty deploy slots. For my attacks, I'll have the Scout try and fatigue the remaining Brawler, and the Treasure Hunter and Novice will try and fatigue the Slave. I forget to attack the Rock Slinger with my other Novice. I roll a 3, which makes the boss use its Prisoner Shield ability. It removes all damage from him and lets him evade this turn. Considering he's currently undamaged, that's good for us. My Scout fatigues the Brawler, and my Treasure Hunter and Novice fatigue the Slave. Then the Rock Slinger deals 1 more damage to my Treasure Hunter. Another turn and I take 1 action to draw. I don't want to be too low on cards left in my combat deck, so I won't take any more actions and move to attacks. Everything will attack the Slinger. I roll an 11 for energy abilities, so the boss uses its Foul Yell's Torment ability. One of my guys at random will receive 1 damage, and I have to fatigue the top card of my combat deck. Thankfully, the last enemy is fatigued, and I have a clear shot at the boss now. Victory is in sight, but I'm low on cards. I pretty boldly take an action to draw a card and get an archer. Then I deploy my Scout into the empty deploy slot and use his Veteran Status ability. Only the boss is left to attack, so all my units will attack it. I roll an 8 for energy abilities, so the boss uses Foul Yell's Torment again, which deals 1 damage to a random deployed allied unit and fatigues the top card of my combat deck. My damaged Scout gets fatigued, and I'm left with 1 card left in my combat deck. My remaining units deal 4 damage to the boss, and the Archer passive ability deals 1 damage to the boss at the end of the combat turn. With 1 card left in my combat deck, I can't afford to draw a card without risking losing. I take an action to use my Archer's Quick Shot ability and deal 1 damage to the boss, then have all my deployed allied units attack him. I roll a 9 for energy abilities, which means the boss uses Foul Yell's Torment again. It fatigues one of my novices, and I fatigue the last card in my combat deck, but thankfully, I don't lose until I have to fatigue a card from my combat deck and can't. My deployed units deal their damage and fatigue the boss, ending the encounter. It really doesn't get closer than that. All expended treasure is shuffled back into the treasure deck, and all active treasure I get to keep for future missions. It's time to check my achievement score to see if I get any rewards. Achievement scores are calculated by adding 1 for all map cards explored and subtracting 3 for each time I was defeated during an encounter. I only explored 5 map cards and I wasn't defeated in any encounters, so my score is 5, which gives me a bronze achievement and a bronze rated treasure card. As you can see, there's incentive to explore as much as possible and get the highest score you can. I hope you enjoyed this playthrough video. Feel free to comment on the video and visit travelersofstoria.com to take a look at the various cards or ask a question in the forums.